In the spring of 2005, I joined my mom and grandparents on a trip to visit family who lived several states away. When we entered their house after a long and boring drive, I found my cousin in the living room. He was sitting on the floor with a GameCube controller in hand, his eyes locked on a monstrous CRT TV. I glanced at the screen and saw this.
Versus Metal Yoshi. Ready? Go!
Prior to that fateful afternoon, I hadn't seen either of the then-existent Super Smash Bros. Games in action. My only experience with Melee involved seeing the game on a shelf at Walmart and recognizing Mario, Kirby, and Zelda. This small glimpse of the actual gameplay was unlike anything I had ever seen before. My cousin defeated Yoshi and proceeded to fight Master Hand, fly through the credit sequence, and return to the main menu. All of these visuals further piqued my interest. On its surface, Melee was a fast-paced, bombastic experience that featured colorful characters, fantastical locales, upbeat music, and a seemingly endless cascade of content. After several sessions of watching my cousin play the game, and even playing it myself, though, I started to detect a hint of underlying malice. I couldn't describe why at the time. Melee simply didn't feel like the bright and cheerful games in my collection at home, and I needed to see what else it had to offer. My experience at my cousin's house resulted in my purchase of Melee a few weeks later, and my subsequent obsession with the Super Smash Bros. Series. Melee has, of course, built a long and dramatic legacy since I first learned of it. Professional players have pushed its gameplay to the absolute limit, data miners have unearthed mountains of unused content, and modders have bestowed it with a variety of new characters and stages. While those folks have spent over 2 decades poring over Melee's mechanics and code, I haven't seen many in-depth analyses of its presentation, the ways in which various artistic choices came together to create a one-of-a-kind and oftentimes eerie experience. Well, I, for one, won't stand for this injustice any longer. Hello everybody, my name is Kerbunny, and today we're going to talk about why Super Smash Bros. Melee's aesthetic is in a league of its own. Before we get started, you should note that I'm not a graphic designer or a game developer or anything like that. I just couldn't help but make a video about a game that was, and still is, extremely important to me. As with everything else on the internet, take my musings with a grain of salt. All set? Then let's go. Released in late 2001, the GameCube was Nintendo's first home console of the 21st century and, appropriately, marked a massive technological leap from the Nintendo 64. Textures and models drastically improved, sound effects and music became much more crisp, and the console's use of discs rather than cartridges allowed games to reach over 1 GB in size. Melee was set to launch shortly after the GameCube, so it needed to function as both an engaging standalone experience and a demonstration of the new console's capabilities. The gorgeous full-motion video that served as the game's reveal trailer and opening cutscene was a product of this shared focus. According to Masahiro Sakurai, it was supposed to serve as a grand opening for the premiere of the GameCube. In addition to proving itself as a technical showcase through the use of vibrant colors, complex geometry, and stunning particle effects, Melee, like other media that came out of the Y2K era, tried to bluff its way into feeling more high-tech by adopting a futuristic aesthetic. This theme immediately takes center stage, with Melee's title screen comprising a slick monochrome logo and a wireframe background. Before players could get a sense of how Nintendo's iconic worlds looked in the new millennium, they needed to take a quick detour through Cyberspace. Pressing start on this screen leads to the main menu, where Melee strongly commits to its technological theme. A faint grid is all that separates the menu itself from a murky background filled with subtly animated shapes, patterns, and text. To the right, a fuzzy monitor provides a preview of the next screen. The emphasis on darker colors evokes thoughts of a desolate void. It contributes to a sense of melancholy despite the upbeat menu music. The character select screen has a similar vibe, relying primarily on navy and various shades of gray. An assortment of sweeping lines and sharp angles makes the screen feel sleek, and the selection tokens and portrait boxes add a metallic twist. The stage select screen boasts many of the same features. What really stands out here is the tiny holographic preview that appears whenever you hover the cursor over a stage. These low-fidelity replicas look like something you would find in a futuristic command center. Even the tournament setup screen has its own share of technological elements, namely a floating collection of monitors that looks like it belongs to an interdimensional stadium, or an interdimensional stock exchange, but that comparison makes significantly less sense. Altogether, the menu feels like the main computer on a derelict spaceship. For all the sleek lines, flat, impersonal fonts, and shiny metal, there are a few bugs that reveal imperfections in the underlying hardware. It's very intuitive, much like the menus in most of Sakurai's other games. Visually, though, it's abrasive and uninviting. These traits actually discouraged my younger self from delving into new submenus too often. The last thing I wanted was to wander into some forbidden section and accidentally screw the whole game up. I didn't actually need to worry as long as I stayed out of the Erase Data submenu, but the anxiety persisted, and any amount of anxiety is, frankly, a total departure from the epic crossover promised in the opening FMV. While the menu is important in terms of making Melee function, it's largely irrelevant to the gameplay. Nobody has time to contemplate the game's user interface while they're actively battling for fortune and glory. Or, a trophy or something. I wouldn't have made such a big deal about Melee's technological themes if they didn't also manifest in the main gameplay loop. Two memorable examples are the special stages that appear throughout Melee's single-player modes, Battlefield and Final Destination. Battlefield is the more sinister of the two, and I'm not just talking about its terrible ledges. Its main platform has spikes, mandibles, and what looks like a pair of bony hands clutching a glowing core. All four platforms have gray surfaces that bear complex, squiggly patterns, not unlike the grooves on a motherboard. The stage seems to be a spacefaring computer, at least if the background is any indication. It glides through an endless starfield, surrounded by shimmering auroras, as battles progress. The appearance of a wireframe wormhole always heralds a change in the aurora's shapes and colors. Battlefield has an alternate background in the form of a swirling rainbow, which is both more visually striking and more fantastical. Final Destination is less pointy, but equally mysterious. As the ultimate arena, it borrows some sports-related imagery from the real world. The darker textures resemble the asphalt of an outdoor basketball court, whereas the transparent portions are similar to the chain-link walls of an MMA cage. These hints of familiarity make the rest of the stage feel more alien by comparison. Shoutouts to its underside, where a bunch of thick blocks orbit around a black core that is somehow emitting white light. This stage is also capable of interstellar travel. It starts in a gorgeous nebula that quickly yields to a series of neon lines and shifting runes. The stage then floats through some sort of space station before turning sideways and entering hyperspace. At the climax of its background loop, it arrives in a bright environment filled with mountains, rivers, and dense cloud cover before quickly returning to the nebula from whence it came. Melee's two special stages stand in stark contrast to the other 27. Even the more futuristic worlds of Metroid, Star Fox, and F-Zero don't compare, as they still have some griminess that makes them feel realistic and lived in. Battlefield and Final Destination, meanwhile, look unrealistically pristine, preserved from decay by the dry and lifeless void of space. Looking at the stages nowadays, I get the sense that they're relics from a long-dead, advanced civilization. I'm primarily reminded of the Forerunners from Halo. While I'm on the topic of stages, I would like to draw some attention to an area that doesn't get nearly enough.
Race to the finish!
It mainly consists of bulky, untextured polygons, like a very early attempt at a 3D render. I always viewed this stage as an escape from a laboratory, given the sense of urgency and the technological elements that appear near the end. When the route forks into three separate paths, one looks like the inside of a giant computer, one sports a neon grid on its floors, and one is a bottomless reactor shaft. This place is almost as dangerous as Black Mesa. Also note how there's a huge smash symbol just chilling in a tunnel. At least the facility's branding is on point. Overall, Race to the Finish leans into a 1980s-esque representation of computer graphics, not unlike what appeared in the original Tron. I brought it up because it heavily contrasts with Battlefield and Final Destination, which feel more contemporary to the era in which Melee launched. Bright neon colors and shiny metal were hallmarks of the Y2K era, at least according to my limited understanding of the topic. Seriously, researching this stuff makes my head spin. Despite the differences between these designs, they still complement each other by touching on the same basic concept of technology's boundless capabilities. I also need to acknowledge Melee's most in-your-face example of technological imagery, the fighting wireframes. These nondescript beings appear in adventure mode, multi-man melee, and a single event match. They're weak in strength, but great in number, so they mostly serve as a minor obstacle between players and some larger goal. For those who don't know, wireframes are the building blocks of 3D models. If you hide a model's faces, and consequently its textures and shaders, you're left with a collection of points and lines, a mere shadow of whatever the model is supposed to represent. They don't look very appealing, so they're seen often by a game's developers, but rarely by its players. The fighting wireframes are memorable and even a bit unnerving because they break this unspoken agreement between creator and consumer. They're not only a representation of cyberspace in general, but also a reminder of the specific technology that allows Melee to exist. And even if you don't have the context for what a wireframe is, they're still clearly artificial constructs. The bones, joints, and heart enclosed within a glowing, human-shaped cage make them seem like futuristic androids. No matter what, they seem downright alien when viewed alongside fully realized renditions of Nintendo's biggest stars. Except, wait a minute, are they fully realized? Despite its numerous triumphs in the graphical department, Melee does have a distinct stench. Due to its status as a very, very rushed launch window title for the GameCube, it didn't squeeze as much power out of the console as games like Metroid Prime, F-Zero GX, and Twilight Princess did. As a result, its characters hit a bizarre graphical sweet spot. They don't look cartoonishly blocky like they did on the N64, but they don't have enough details, blemishes, etc. to seem truly lifelike. Several years ago, someone on the now-defunct Facepunch forums shared a perfect description of Melee's art style. It's basically the closest we've got to PS1-era pre-rendered FMVs in playable form. Like how you look at a square cutscene in '98 and go, wow, this is what graphics will look like in the future! Or early GameCube tech demos that never reflected how games would actually look. Everybody's stiffer and kind of plasticky. That description hits the nail on the head. Melee reaches, if not exceeds, the heights of the pre-rendered cutscenes that appeared on the previous generation's hardware in real time. While the game is immensely impressive from a technological standpoint, its ambition often causes it to mildly miss the mark from an artistic one. Pretty much every member of the playable cast has at least one visual quirk that makes them seem off. Take the realistic human characters as examples. Their faces are smooth and stiff, with pointy noses and lips that remain stubbornly neutral. They look like they belong on a shelf next to Nick Bluetooth. Yeah, remember Galador? No? Oh, okay. The more cartoony characters also look like toys, although that's mostly because their smooth, bulbous heads and/or bodies cause light to hit them in an unbelievable way. Certain characters have more unique issues. Luigi and Donkey Kong have dead-eyed stares, Fox's and Falco's faces are frozen in stern positions, Pikachu and Young Link have lumpy cheeks, Peach might as well be a porcelain doll, Yoshi looks less like his Super Mario World sprite and more like his spine is broken. Bowser has a more sickly, washed-out color scheme, as well as some really jagged edges on his arms and legs. Mewtwo's head is disproportionately large, and its fingers are too spindly. The list goes on and on and on. The characters are perfectly recognizable as Nintendo's All-Stars, but their imperfections create an Uncanny Valley effect, wherein we subconsciously see them as inexplicable facsimiles of their actual selves. Now is a good time to remind you that I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. For the record, I don't think the characters look bad. After all, I did make multiple videos in which I fawned over plasticky renders from the mid to late 90s. I love how Melee is the only official game that allows me to mess around with models of that specific fidelity. The problem is that Melee has a much harder job than the Silicon Graphics workstation that rendered these promotional images. It needs to display several high-poly characters on stages with high-resolution textures, dynamic backgrounds, and passively realistic light, and it needs to do so 60 times per second. Nobody is around to curate each individual frame, so the game's art style occasionally flies off the rails. The fast-paced gameplay usually obscures the visual weirdness, but pausing and/or taking a screenshot brings it to the forefront. Even my younger self thought some of the congratulations screenshots looked strange. Even when they depict funny situations, they seem a bit stiff and lifeless. Other screenshots, like these ones from DeathStar.com, have the same vibe. The sense of uncanniness extends to many of Melee's non-special stages. There are obviously some standouts like Pokefloats and Flat Zone, which are just surreal fever dreams, but even the more normal stages don't feel entirely real. Take Brinstar, Yoshi's Island, and Fountain of Dreams as examples. In their original games, they clearly exist as parts of larger worlds. In Melee, that context is gone. The stages aren't natural extensions of their respective universes. They're vertical slices carefully constructed to contain a few recognizable elements. And yeah, that's obviously the practical purpose of a Super Smash Bros. Stage, but later games in the series managed to incorporate more connective tissue. Even the stages that do exist as parts of larger worlds don't entirely maintain the illusion. In many cases, their horizons just stop at a certain point, their limitations poorly disguised by fog, the boxiest of skyboxes, or a flat PNG. They feel like dioramas with some high-budget set dressing. I want to draw special attention to the Mushroom Kingdom stage, both because it's relevant, and because I don't think I'll ever get a chance to rant about it again. This stage is obviously meant to emulate the original Super Mario Bros., complete with 8-bit graphics and audio. That said, pretty much everything is slightly wrong. When you look at the stage alongside actual gameplay of Super Mario Bros., you can see that most of the colors are either over or under saturated. The floor looks particularly dull when compared to the more orange blocks from the original game. Another strange element is the sky, which uses a gradient instead of a solid color. There's also the obvious mishmash of 2D sprites and 3D objects. The pipes look particularly out of place, since they're perfectly round objects in a world that otherwise consists of square pixels. Oh, and what the hell are these signs doing here? We know that the edges of the screen are dangerous, and we can't even see the signs during normal gameplay, so who are they there for? The characters? Who's even responsible for marking the edges of the playable space anyway? And only on this stage? Did they get fired because they did such a bad job the first time? To make things more confusing, the music sounds a bit different. The notes have an echoey quality to them, and each one can't quite seem to finish before the next one plays. The track sounds a bit more hollow as a result. All of these oddities work together to create a bizarre middle ground of a stage that's neither a perfect recreation of the original Super Mario Bros., nor anywhere close to a modernization. The real kicker is that Ultimate skipped out on this stage in favor of its N64 equivalent, so I'll never get to see what it would have looked like with a modern-day art pass. It's a shame too, since I vastly prefer this stage's symmetrical layout. Returning to my overall point, certain technological limitations and artistic choices cause Melee's stages to feel empty and artificial. The distinct sense that nothing lies beyond their very visible borders makes the whole experience feel more claustrophobic and, in a certain respect, oppressive. As a matter of fact, Melee is rife with oppressive details. One such detail is the voice of the ever-present announcer. Dean Harrington is my favorite of the 4 announcers to appear in the Super Smash Bros. Series thus far. Just listen to this guy.
Choose your character. Mario! Multi-Man Melee! Wow! Incredible! Super Sudden Death! Smash Brothers!
He is absolutely hyped, and he wants everyone else to feel the same way. For every line delivered with high energy and goofy enunciation, though, there's another delivered with a more stilted and ominous cadence.
Start player removed. Player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4, computer player defeated. Failure. Game over.
The echo effect on his voice gives him an even more commanding presence, and additional filters make him sound a bit muffled and metallic. Those nuances add another mysterious wrinkle to the whole experience. Is he simply using a cheap microphone from a separate room, or is he an AI with middling voice generation capabilities? His constant, overbearing presence invites questions of what his deal is and what he wants from the characters, and, by extension, the players. It's impossible to answer that question, though, as the announcer remains unseen and unchallenged throughout the entire game. Of course, the announcer is only the ringmaster. Several in-game events also gesture at the idea of Melee being an oppressive experience, the most notable of which is... As many of us know all too well, the Challenger approaching screen is simultaneously exciting and frightening. Between the pulsating tube in the background, the bright yellow warning text, and that dreadful klaxon, the appearance of a secret character feels less like an accomplishment and more like a severe computer malfunction. Like, are they supposed to be here? Have they been sent to stop us? Have we been sent to stop them? Why is this development so urgent that it requires a siren? The Challenger's silhouette certainly doesn't help. In 2005, I had neither a comprehensive knowledge of Nintendo's history nor an easy way to hop onto the internet to learn more, so this screen often forced me to spend a few seconds wondering who or what I was about to fight. Altogether, these elements cause each encounter with a new character to feel as much like a punishment as it does a reward. Melee has a habit of doling out new content with a heavy hand. The secret bosses are the most obvious examples. Crazy Hand materializes out of nowhere if you deal enough damage to Master Hand, and Bowser comes back and mutates into Giga Bowser immediately after his defeat. And let's not forget the Metal Bros, who descend from the sky after you defeat a handful of fighting wireframes. The stiff animation coupled with the droning noise gives the encounter an unsettling twist. I'm even inclined to argue that Adventure Mode's other cutscenes have a weird vibe, since they depict a bunch of random stuff that just happens to make your life harder. There's no in-game explanation for why any of these things happen. Melee's arcadey nature, lack of a storyline, and refusal to place clear limits on what can happen contribute to the sense of anxiety I mentioned earlier. A new character or a horrifying monster could appear at any moment, and players would have no idea why. As far as they're concerned, the situation only ever worsens because Melee disliked something they did and deployed countermeasures in response. These oppressive elements, coupled with the technological themes and the uncanny nature of most characters and stages, feed into what is effectively my thesis statement for this video. Melee feels like it takes place inside a simulation. Please, just hear me out. Ever since the first game, the Super Smash Bros. Series' only consistent piece of lore has been that the battles are actually instances of some faceless child playing with figurines. This information is both convenient for Nintendo's family-friendly brand, and, crucially, boring as shit, so I'm gonna ignore it. Or rather, I'm gonna offer an alternate interpretation. Maybe the kid watched The Matrix on VHS and decided to pretend his favorite Nintendo characters were trapped in a simulation. I don't know. Whatever the case, Melee contains a bunch of seemingly disconnected details that hint at something more sinister than an arbitrary, pointless crossover. One of those details is the special movie, specifically the opening seconds. It's just a loud cacophony of sound effects from various games, several pained screams, and another siren. The volume and discordance are jarringly unpleasant. After a few moments of chaos, the video reboots to the title screen and begins to show much more coherent and amusing clips of the characters. I'm almost inclined to argue that those initial seconds represent the birth of the simulation. I envision a computer swallowing tons of data about Nintendo's various worlds and only stopping to make sense of it after accumulating enough. Okay, I'm about to tumble down a deep, speculative rabbit hole, so I'm gonna pull back a bit. Still, the fact that I can get so invested in the storyline of a game that doesn't even have one is emblematic of how Melee's mysterious nature captures the imagination. Another more solid point in the theory's favor is the prevalence of wireframes. What the f*** was that? Another more concrete point in the theory's favor is the aforementioned prevalence of wireframes, which serve as constant reminders of Melee's artificiality. Whenever we see one in the background, we're effectively catching a glimpse of what makes the world tick. The transition from the opening cutscene's bright, sunny background to the title screen's dark cluster of wireframes is like a mirage fading away to reveal a less desirable reality. Similar effects appear in the backgrounds of Battlefield and Final Destination, as I mentioned earlier, so the imagery is present in the gameplay as well. Notably, both stages only exist to facilitate specific challenges for skilled players. By the time they become relevant, maintaining a more inviting facade isn't a major priority for them. In a similar vein, the fighting wireframes strip away the colorful and cartoony veneer that covers the rest of the game's characters. They're built purely for the sake of combat, aesthetics be damned. Encounters with them always feel a bit more momentous as a result, even if their actual stats are garbage outside of cruel melee. The metal characters fill a similar niche, since they're also hyper-specialized, voiceless automatons that only appear when a situation gets serious. In that way, these NPCs are somewhat analogous to these things from Tron and the agents from The Matrix. Whoever's in charge can't simply delete the protagonist from existence for some reason, so they need to engage them on a physical level. Even if this theoretical simulation isn't trying to outright kill the characters, it's definitely gathering data on their abilities. Whenever a single-player battle concludes, a terminal lists any notable events that occurred and assigns a value to them. The Event Match submenu has the ominous heading of Subject Table, as if the list is a collection of scenarios for the simulation to test. The bonus stages exist to test specific skills and lack any sort of additional context. I've already discussed Race to the Finish at length, so we'll skip over it. Snag the Trophies is a fusion of ethereal beauty and casino decor. What, are we playing the slots on Mount Olympus? The Trophy Tussle stages are some of the strangest in the series' history, since they're just scaled-up trophies in a void. And oh, what's that in the background? Is that some random junk getting indiscriminately sucked into a portal? Interesting. Very interesting. The target test stages are particularly odd, as most of them are slapdash obstacle courses made of random objects. A good number of these objects come from, or at least based on, the universes represented in Melee. We've got the girders from Donkey Kong, these platforms from Pokemon Stadium, these F-Zero signs, an entire stage from Ice Climber, an entire Game & Watch, GameCube? How'd that get in there? Even the objects with no obvious source look like they plausibly came from somewhere in the appropriate character's world. For example, these trees in Young Link's stage are reminiscent of Kokiri Forest, and the white marble of Bowser's stage could be a modern interpretation of the castle interiors from the original Super Mario Bros. My younger self didn't catch all of these references, or any of them for that matter, but even he recognized that the target test stages felt like conglomerates of stuff from somewhere. My main point is that Melee's efforts to keep players busy can also feel like attempts to keep the characters busy. Whereas later titles like Smash 4 and Ultimate present themselves as formal tournaments that every video game character aspires to enter, Melee feels more like an unethical science experiment. Its oppressive energy does a lot of heavy lifting in this regard, since the characters rarely feel like willing participants. Melee is the only Smash game without specialized on-screen appearances, so the characters simply sizzle into existence as if they're being summoned from somewhere. They must run and jump and punch over and over again so the simulation can gather more data. Why? Well, I have no idea. The Fighting Wireframe's use of movesets and animations from Captain Falcon and Zelda could imply that the fighters' information is somehow being assimilated and used against them, but I'm veering into heavy speculation again. The notion that Melee takes place in a pocket dimension is directly referenced in a couple of trophy descriptions. Final Destinations trophy says that the level appears to travel through a wormhole from the imaginary Super Smash Bros. Melee world into reality, and that the scenery is as real as you get in this fantastical world. The Japanese version of that text goes one step further by describing the aftermath of the Master Hand fight. After your battle on this stage has ended, a cutscene plays of your fighter escaping the reality and being turned back into a trophy. Master Hand's trophy also refers to him as a symbolic link between the real world and the imaginary battlefields of Super Smash Bros. Melee. The word imaginary is obviously supposed to refer to the kid who's busy playing pretend, but it's not hard to employ a more general interpretation, like the world of Melee is constructed or otherwise false. The fact that the characters and stages look artificial certainly contributes to this sensation. Master Hand and Crazy Hand could easily be seen as avatars of whoever controls the simulation. Because, let's be honest, I'm sure we've all tormented at least one virtual character through the use of a disembodied pointer or hand. Maybe that example was a bit too violent. Furthermore, the line about escaping the reality indicates that this false world is something to flee. Thankfully, Melee does contain one reprieve from the violence and oppression. The All-Star Rest area, unlike every other stage that originated in Melee, is neither a technological nightmare nor a void filled with random garbage. It's merely a peaceful park with gorgeous emerald green grass and a deep blue sky. The park has several amenities, including a fountain, a bench, and a lamppost. I would love to sit on that bench and read a book for a few hours. Or, to once again quote the wise words of Nintendo Capri Sun, I'd sleep there. It goes without saying that the stage's simplicity is what makes it stand out. After dozens upon dozens of hours filled with abstract challenges, it provides a welcome taste of normalcy. It reminds me of the moon's interior from Majora's Mask. These areas aren't notable in isolation. They wouldn't have even justified themselves as tech demos in the early 2000s. They're only memorable because they're sandwiched between so much other insanity. Essentially, they're the exceptions that prove their respective games' rules. As for what or where the All-Star Rest area actually is, I'm not sure. Maybe it's a representation of the real world, or maybe it's a virtual Valhalla that the characters get to visit after fighting so valiantly. Whatever the case, it's certainly a nice reward after such a long journey. This particular stage is also notable because it marks the beginning of the end of the average player's experience with Melee. All-Star Mode only becomes available after the player obtains, well, all stars, so they've likely seen their fair share of weird shit by the time they unlock it. In my case, I gained access to All-Star Mode on a Saturday morning. The sky was still dark and my parents were still asleep when Mewtwo unexpectedly appeared after a versus match. I unlocked him, and then Mr. Game & Watch unexpectedly appeared after I finished Classic Mode with Mewtwo. I unlocked him, and then I unlocked All-Star Mode. The last characters I obtained were an alien who sounded like he was breathing through an iron lung, and a two-dimensional thing that I had never heard of before. I was more than ready to see what Melee might throw at me in the final stretch, and then I reached the All-Star Rest area. The stage didn't elicit a strong reaction, although its gorgeous environment and soft music certainly relaxed me. More than anything else, it allowed me to slow down and adjust my perspective. I had officially unlocked every character, and I was looking at what was quite possibly the last unique area in the game. After playing Melee for several months, I was on the verge of running out of surprises. There were still a few surprises in store. I hadn't expected to unlock Battlefield after finishing All-Star Mode for the first time, and I didn't find out about Giga Bowser's existence until I received the official player's guide as part of my first subscription to Nintendo Power. If we want to talk about unintended surprises, then my eventual discovery of DebtStar.com and therefore Melee's debug menu fueled my imagination for years. It only takes one look at my YouTube channel to see that. Still, the magic started to fade on that dark and quiet morning. Maybe that's why Melee's eerie vibes and general aesthetic don't receive much attention beyond occasional forum posts. People remember Wind Waker for its art style and storyline. They remember Metroid Prime for its impeccable translation of Metroidvania tropes into 3D. And they remember Super Mario Sunshine for its tropical vibes and janky levels, because those elements in those games have remained the same for over 20 years. Melee's mysterious aura, meanwhile, fades away after you've unlocked everything and played a few thousand matches with the same set of plasticky characters. The game is instead remembered for its extremely solid mechanics and slew of advanced techniques. It absolutely deserves that attention, but it's also not surprising that 2 decades worth of focus on a handful of players min-maxing a handful of characters to succeed on a handful of stages has drawn attention away from minor crap like the geometry of Race to the Finish and the implications of 2 blurry words in the event match submenu. If nothing else, Melee is a prime example of how a dedicated team can create something that is more than the sum of its parts. I've analyzed a ton of details thus far, but I can't even begin to convey how they work together to create a truly one-of-a-kind experience. And as much as I want to say that I would love to play another game that captures Melee's mysterious essence, I don't know if that's possible. Melee is very much a product of the unique conditions in which it was created, with state-of-the-art but still limited hardware, incredibly short deadlines, a need to demonstrate an entire console's capabilities, and influence from design sensibilities that were popular around the turn of the millennium. It perfectly encapsulates a specific moment in the history of Nintendo and game development as a whole. My best evidence for this belief is that Sakurai, when given a larger team, significantly more time, and a greater degree of creative freedom, went on to make absolutely nothing like it in the intervening years. Brawl adopted a bright, bubbly style for its menus and a more epic tone that gave its characters muted, realistic textures and took them through crumbled structures and overgrown wastelands. Smash 4 and Ultimate, meanwhile, abandoned overt themes in the interest of creating a much more cohesive celebration of Nintendo's history and gaming in general. I don't dislike any of these games for their different identities or lack thereof. I have almost as much nostalgia for Brawl as I do for Melee, and I appreciate how Smash 4 and Ultimate do everything in their power to respect the franchises represented in them. Melee just did a lot to stand out at the perfect time in my life. Even if we never get another game with the traits described in this video, I'm happy to have one. Melee will live on in tournament venues, on modding websites, and in the memories of countless players, one of whom spent far too many summer days battling CPUs and wondering what surprises awaited him. And with Ultimate's DLC complete and no Smash-related news on the immediate horizon, I would love it if the community took some time to look back and appreciate what makes Melee so special from an artistic perspective. And who knows, maybe someone will feel inspired to invent a Melee core aesthetic, or even make a game that captures people's imaginations like Melee captured mine. There's only one way to find out, and that's by finally releasing this damn video. Thank you very much for watching. Well, that's one more long-term project out of the way. This video has been in limbo for quite a while. I had the idea several years ago and finally got around to writing the script in May of 2021. There were too many ideas to wrangle, though, so I periodically stopped and restarted out of frustration. I finally managed to edit the script into a semi-coherent narrative, and I hope you enjoyed it. As I expressed earlier, I'm not aware of any other games that replicate Melee's energy, but I haven't played nearly as many games as you might expect of an enthusiast such as myself, so do let me know if there are any retro or recent titles that are similar to Melee in terms of aesthetics. I would love to check them out. Also, now that I've moved, my office is incredibly echoey, so I'm recording this voiceover under a blanket in the middle of August. I'm going to die. Get me out of here. I need to... Here, look. This is what it sounds like without the blanket. It was completely necessary, but good God, was it awful. Anyway, be sure to like the video to let me know if I'm doing something right, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe if you're inclined to see more. I've got plenty of additional ideas in the pipeline, and I'm excited to eventually realize them. Hi, December Kerbunny here. I recorded the rest of this video a long-ass time ago, and a couple of other things have come to my attention, so I just wanted to mention them here as an addendum. First of all, I'm no longer under a blanket. I bought some curtains, and they're absorbing the echo magnificently. Number 2, you should be seeing some images scrolling up the screen right now. These are screenshots of pretty much every post that has served as inspiration for this video over the past, 3.5 years that I've been working on it? These posts really helped me sort out my thoughts, and I wanted to give credit to everybody who had even a minor impact on how this video turned out. I censored all of the names because privacy is a complicated thing nowadays, and this was certainly a lot easier than contacting each individual person to ask them for permission. If, by some miracle, you see a comment of yours in this video and you would like some amount of credit, just let me know and I'll throw your name into the video description. Third and finally, I may or may not be posting a video to my second channel, Kerbunny's Grab Bag, either concurrently with this video or the day after this video. Basically, the video is just me playing Super Smash Bros. Melee with a mirrored OBS scene to kind of function like a sort of Mario Kart mirror mode for Smash Bros. My controls are mirrored as well, so I can actually play the game. I thought it would be a fun way to kind of disorient myself and look at Melee in a different way after combing over every single minuscule detail of how Melee actually is. Oh yeah, and this video should be posted on December 3rd, 2024, marking the 23rd anniversary of Melee's NTSC launch. Wow, the big 23. Melee is about as old as I was when I started working on this video. Okay, I've rambled enough. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you around. Bye.